Let's take a look at brain structures that you can see on the mini model. So if we open this up, we can actually remove the brain so that we can see both sides. Now when I'm looking at it this way, this would be the right hemisphere of the cerebrum. This would be the left hemisphere of the cerebrum. So let's kind of zoom in just on this one, and I'm just going to go through the structures. So this again is my left hemisphere. This is the cerebrum. The ridges are called gyri. An individual one is a gyrus. We have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. The frontal and parietal are separated here with two gyri. So you have a sulcus that runs right between them. So the sulcus is the groove. So this is the central sulcus that separates frontal from parietal. The ridge right in front of that central sulcus here would be the precentral gyrus. The one behind it is the postcentral gyrus. Remember that the frontal lobe controls conscious motor activity, problem solving, emotional control, and consequential thinking. It's important to realize that obviously there's a lot of motor control involved in speech, so your speech area is also in the frontal lobe. The parietal lobe is primarily sensory. The occipital lobe is for vision. The temporal lobe is for forming your short-term memories, which will then become long-term memories in the upper regions of the cerebrum. And it is where we process auditory or hearing. If we look at the inside here, we have the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. There's a space up underneath that corpus callosum called the lateral ventricle. We form cerebrospinal fluid in there, and then it flows from that lateral ventricle into the third ventricle here, which is located between the two halves of the thalamus. Then that fluid flows down through the cerebral aqueduct, which is right through the middle of the midbrain, and then flows into the fourth ventricle, which is between the cerebellum and the brainstem. The thalamus up here is my last relay station that directs information up to the different parts of my cerebrum. Now the pituitary gland would be attached right off of here, attached to the hypothalamus by the infundibulum. It's a little bit difficult to see all that on here, but where you kind of see that dot right there would be the thalamus. So the hypothalamus is right in front of it here. The pituitary gland and the hypothalamus create hormones that you'll get into in the endocrine system. The cerebellum helps with learned or skilled motor activities. Now we can't see that clearly on this model, but there's white matter that looks like little branches of a tree inside of the cerebellum. That white matter has a special name called the arbor vitae. This area from here down is called the brainstem. The cerebral aqueduct runs right through the midbrain. So this and this are the midbrain. The midbrain helps with consciousness, smoothing the motor activities of the cerebellum, and it helps with visual and auditory reflexes like blinking and the startle reflex and focusing or accommodation in the eyes. Below the midbrain is the pons. The pons relays information over to the cerebellum. And then just below the pons is the medulla oblongata, probably the most important part of your brain that keeps you alive by regulating heart rate, blood pressure, and other important basic functions. Once we get below the medulla, then we're in the spinal cord.